And people in the room, make sure you have what you need to be comfortable. If you're new, big welcome. And we have extra supplies in the closet in the corner there. If you need a different cushion or support or a bench, blanket. And today, let's take some time, listen to our posture. Out of compassion for the body, make adjustments. Listen. We won't find, probably, we won't find the perfect sitting posture, but we just do the best we can, finding that balance of relaxation and uprightness that supports being alert. See what that balance can be for you this morning. We're looking for the posture that helps us feel like we're right in the middle, opening and relating in a way that has a lot of compassion and integrity, not trying to avoid feeling what we're feeling. And then the second stage, once you've made the adjustments, is to take some time and do a few deeper, fuller breaths, but in a relaxed way, where you're taking as much time as is comfortable to fill and then to empty the lungs, and then doing that a few times. And the simple ritual of taking a few longer, deeper breaths is just a way to shift gears at the beginning of our meditation time. And to relearn that we can be intimate with something ordinary, like breathing in slowly and deeply, breathing out slowly and deeply, and feeling the body as it is, the sitting body. And in doing that, the mind then will naturally drop its other obsessions and worries and mental activities, whatever they might be. And then you can begin to allow the breathing process to transition into whatever way the body wants to breathe. And it's so lovely, so convenient that the body is able to breathe without needing to be in charge of it. We can just trust the instincts of the body to do the breathing, no matter how those breaths are, just knowing that the body can just do the breathing. Even if the breaths seem erratic or too shallow, too deep, whatever, just let the body do the breathing, trusting. One of the initial lessons we're learning in meditation is how to bring a full, relaxed attention to, for example, the breath without, out of habit, needing to control it. So we're learning that it's possible to be really present, really intimate, but not having to judge or control what we're aware of. Just letting a natural process be a natural process, like the breath in the body. But it's a training. We shouldn't expect to be good at this initially. And over the last few weeks, we've been learning both about using a more exclusive object, meditation object, to train the mind to be attentive. So in this case, being with the breath, this natural process of breathing in and breathing out, just the physicality of that process, whether you're feeling it at the nostrils or feeling it as that expansion and contraction of the chest and abdomen, or however it's easy to feel that natural process of breathing in and breathing out for you. And a related part of this training is discovering that we can be quite interested in something neutral and ordinary like the breathing process. But again, it's a skill because we tend to ignore what's neutral and ordinary. So practice keeping this ordinary process in mind through the duration of one inhalation, and then through the duration of one exhalation. So in this way, we'll do it one half breath at a time, because that way we can have some success, where there will be that unwavering continuity of presence for just one in-breath or one out-breath. And of course, distractions will arise, so we'll lose the thread, but then we'll just begin again, connecting, sustaining this simple, receptive, non-judging, non-controlling presence with our meditation object. And then a little later in the sit, we'll expand, we'll have a more inclusive awareness of the present moment, but for at least some time, let's work with this more exclusive attention to the breathing process. Or if you're familiar with some other exclusive meditation object that you're familiar with. It's really the effort to be interested in the meditation object and to not believe the thought that I can't be with the breath or with my training object, training anchor, because it's not interesting or whatever it might be. Because it's not even that we have to bring the attention to the breath, to the meditation object. It's really more about recognizing that the mind is already sensitive to the sensations of breathing in and breathing out. So the effort is more about remembering to notice that the mind is already sensitive. So we're remembering to notice the awareness, in a sense, that breathing in is being known and the sensations of breathing out are being known. So we're just using the breath in this case as a skillful means to keep the present moment in mind. This is what undercuts the deep habit to be lost in thought. And this is really our first training in meditation, to realize that the mind can be aware, can recognize the present moment, that this is being known. The present moment is what is being known, or that process of knowing experience is what we call the present moment. Knowing that we're knowing, you could say. And then when you feel you have some momentum, you can allow the practice to naturally evolve to be more inclusive. So you can still be aware, of course, of breathing in and breathing out just as it is. But as you feel the breath coming in, you can just begin to notice all the other experiences that are being known, like the other sensations in the body or sounds in the room, thoughts in the mind. So breathing in, aware of the totality of the present moment, what's coming and going. You don't have to try to notice a lot of other objects, just noticing that there are other objects being known naturally. And one of the reasons why we want to learn to have a more inclusive awareness of the present moment is that way these other arisings, whether it's a thought or a strange sound or pain in the body, they don't have to be a problem. They're just another thing that's being felt or being known here and now in the present moment. So the mind then is less dependent on the meditation object to sustain present moment awareness. So if you haven't begun yet, experiment with this more inclusive awareness. You can still be aware of breathing in, but you're remembering to open or sense the totality of the sensitive heart, sounds, sights, sensations, thoughts, whatever's predominant. So you're just noticing what the mind is knowing. Just the great diversity. And you can really relax because the sensitivity isn't something you or I have to do. The mind or the heart is already sensitive. And so we're just recognizing or remembering to recognize what's being sensed. So the whole system can be quite relaxed. Just remembering what the mind is knowing, what the mind is sensing. Thoughts are just thoughts. Sounds are just sounds. All of these different phenomena are just something being known here and now. And the way the mind gets trained, or you could say even rewired, is in our willingness to begin again. Because probably you'll find yourself distracted or lost in thought many times. But then in the context of being lost in thought, there will arise this impulse to practice, which means to be or to remember, to recognize that whatever's happening is something being known. You could even call it an appearance. This experience that's being known is an appearance in our heart or mind. It feels like this. It's sensed like it's sensed, which is an experience being known here and now. So it's a radical simplifying of what we take to be our experience. Something is being felt or being known. And it might be pleasant, it might be unpleasant, it might be neutral. But still, it's just something being known. And if there's a reaction, the body or the mind flinches, let's say, then that's what's being known next. The flinching being felt. But for the last couple minutes, you can experiment with this permission, just allowing experiencing to happen. And just experimenting with the liberating feeling of not having to manage experience. Just let it move through. Not afraid of being sensitive, just remembering to relate to it as something being known, something being felt. So just do the best you can for the last 2 minutes. We could say that we're harmonizing with the way it is. Expressing as best we can this non-fear, not having to control. And even in this cognitive sense, not having to understand or explain to ourselves. And you might notice that the underlying feeling tone is of freedom, being free with experience moving. And take some time if you want and stretch your body, adjust whatever you need to do. And a big welcome to everyone. Nice to see everybody in the room and all the folks online. So I've been giving a series of talks on the liberating potential of awareness, and it's definitely not something you want to believe in, right? Because the wanting present moment awareness to take care of my problems becomes a problem in and of itself. But we want to check it out as if, appropriately, because for 2,600 years or so, using the teachings of the Buddha, so many people, millions and millions, of course, have made a big deal of this wisdom awareness thing. And so it's appropriate for us to ask, well, what's the big deal about wisdom and awareness? And does it really deliver what our heart deeply seeks? The release, the freedom that we sense is maybe possible for us humans. Does it deliver? And like I mentioned, it doesn't really help to believe that it does. The whole point of connecting with some of these teachings is to move in this direction of independence, where we hear something, right, or read something, learn something, and we get interested enough to make sure that we're clear about what we're hearing, what we're reading, so that we become initially independent enough to, in a sense, regurgitate the teaching to ourselves. Like, what was it that I read earlier in the day? Or what was it that I heard at Common Ground Meditation Center last week? And we bring it to mind. And then this part we call reflection or contemplation. Like, well, what does this bit of information have to do with my lived experience right now? Like, how might it be pragmatically relevant to this experience of having a mind and body, a life? Is it relevant? Because if it's not relevant here and now, then it becomes just, a shiny ornament that I'm a Buddhist, or I believe in X, Y, and Z. And we do that with all of our political and all kinds of things we sort of cling to as almost like a brand. I'm this is what I believe, I'm not that. But the practices aren't meant to be that kind of way, because it doesn't take much observation of our own experience and other people, that kind of clinging to some belief, wanting something to be true, what we in Buddhism call fixed views, that's a cause for stress. I mean, we can see that all the time, and we can sense it in ourselves, and we can sense it in others. Clinging to views, clinging to opinions, to beliefs, just directly forget about what it sets in motion in our wider world, which is a lot more stress. Just in that immediate sense, energetically, we get tight when we're clinging to views. Even really skillful views. Like the Buddha has this great simile of the raft. Some of you have heard it. It's a pretty famous simile that the Buddha used in his teachings. And he said it's like you're in this really tenuous, vulnerable place as a human being, and you look across this expanse of water, and you feel directly the insecurity and vulnerability, uncertainty here, and you see a safe space, but it's across the flood, across the body of water. So you collect twigs and branches and ropes, and you make yourself a raft, and you get across the flood, and you're in a safe place, and then you think, well, this raft has been really helped me. I'm going to put it on my back and carry it around with me. And the Buddha says, no. Even wise teachings, wise practices that have been really skillful, you don't need to cling to. The clinging is unnecessary. The understanding of cause and effect, like how to take care of ourselves or how to take others, that's good to know, but we don't have to cling even to what we have come to understand in life. We don't have to make it something that somebody clings to. The obvious example would be something like, through all of our trials and tribulations, we learn that it works better when we're kind, and it doesn't work so well when we're mean, But then we could really turn it into this burden, like, I'm all about kindness. Did I tell you I'm all about kindness? You should be about kindness. I've got kindness on my wall at home. Do you want to come see it? It's a thing for me. I'm all about kindness. And you can sense in ourselves and in others, like, I get why they've recognized that this way of being, this way of relating has turned out to work for them. But why are they making it a heavy thing that they have to drag along? I'm sure you've caught yourself, I have, where we don't generally catch it right away, but we're invested in making sure somebody gets who we are. It's like, do you got my brand? This is who I am. And it's almost like we want them to repeat it back, so we're sure that when they leave the interaction, they're going to know who I am. And we definitely don't want them to think we're somebody that we don't think we are. have you noticed that when somebody, especially somebody close to you, you sense that they have the wrong idea about you or about what you did in some particular situation, it's very hard to accept that people have rights to their own reality, like who they think you are, you know? And it's a huge burden to have to feel responsible to make sure that everybody thinks about me the way I want to be thought about. I mean, can you imagine what we go through? And how much suffering whenever that person comes to mind and then the thought arises, they don't get me or they think I'm this way. And it's like we just want to look for an opportunity to set them straight. And that's a real burden in life. So what I want to talk about, you know, in this series of talks on the liberating potential of awareness, wisdom and awareness, is how important wise view, or the way the mind is relating. And the thing is, when we're present, you know, like right now to some degree, we're aware that this is being known to some degree, but we're not necessarily, we just presume that what we're knowing is reality. But it's actually like what this is, you could say, is reality skewed or distorted by the way the mind is knowing, by the view or the pattern of how we understand how the mind makes up meaning. And this is related to the perceptual process. And, you know, we know this is true because we can be with somebody, like a good friend even, or partner, and same place, you know, having some version of the same experience, but we have very different realities, different interpretations, even though we were sort of in the same place at the same time. Because reality is, or our experience, I should say, is something being known. And the being known part is almost always being colored by different ways of relating, different views, different perspectives, the attitude in the mind, and just those patterns of distortion that are so omnipresent we don't realize. Like the obvious one is we just experience everything in terms of a me who's having an experience. And that perspective that this experience is happening to me, we rarely see that as something happening in the moment. Like that's what we in Buddhism would call a distortion. Because actually our experience right now isn't this is happening to me. Actually, when the system settles and therefore can be more clear, it's simply something being known. And even if there's that feeling that it's really personal what's happening, that's the something that's being known. It's never more than that, an experience being known. And another thing is how often, almost always, there's some sense of permanence or static, set quality to our experience. Like, I'm really at common ground, and that idea of being at common ground has a permanence, a set. We don't experience it as, like, there really isn't a thing, common ground or Minneapolis or any of the nouns that dominate how we understand experience. There's nothing really established. It's all movement, flow. But we don't experience it that way because our experience is distorted. And it's distorted into this binary of good and bad. So things that we like, we see as good, but there's nothing essentially good in our pleasant experiences or bad in our unpleasant experience. It's just that those sensations or that sight or that sound being known, and the mind's labeling or understanding it as painful or pleasant or neutral. But in that essential thing, that, essential way that something's good or beautiful or ugly or bad or painful, that's a projection. It's making something extra. It's just this experience being felt. So whatever that experience of unpleasantness is, it's just that being known. And you can do this, like when you're smelling an unpleasant smell that, let's say, isn't harmful, and you can go back and forth. It's really a good Dharma practice just to go back and forth between that very personal, like, this is not okay for me, this is a bad smell that I'm having, to it's just the smell being known. It's just the unpleasantness of the smell being known. And then all of a sudden, the experience doesn't include the duality of good and bad. It's just something being known. And then you can go flip back into that reality. No, this is definitely bad. And I really would prefer not this. So it's almost like you're understanding that we have this capacity to live in two different realities, and they're not like in different places. We can be in a very self-centered reality, and there's a way to drop that or abandon that, and then it's not that very self-centered reality, whatever you want to call that. A wiser way of relating is one way you might call that. But it's like a different reality. And you know how it is, because some things we used to take very personally, a few years back or 20 years ago, that now we have a lot more wisdom around, and it doesn't generate a lot of personal drama for us, right? But we can probably still, put ourselves back in that old frame of mind, right? Like, oh yeah, there's that, oh yeah, this would have really rocked my boat back in the day. I would have been thrown for a loop, I would have been upset, I wouldn't have been able to put this down, I would have freaked out, I would have, And now, it's sort of like you can see that reality, but the mind isn't caught by that reality. Like you still understand the structure of that reality, but it's not such a big thing. Like we had a child in the room a little bit ago. I think they're walking in the lobby maybe, but it's the same thing. Maybe the first child you have, I didn't raise kids, but so it's easy for me to speculate. But some of you with more expertise probably know this. It's like the way we relate to our child being upset. The first child in the first months, it's maybe one thing. The crying or the dis-ease of our child is impactful in one way, but then after you've seen it, hundreds of nights through 3 kids or something like that, them being ill at ease for whatever reason, there's probably a lot more space if you survive that long, right? Sometimes it's like this. And that one way, if we're going to survive as a parent or even a lover or a friend, we have to learn how to have more space around those people we love, their suffering. If we personalize the dis-ease, the suffering of our loved ones, one, we don't help them. All of a sudden they have another burden besides whatever's causing them suffering, is they're aware that now I'm making this person who I love upset. My suffering is a cause for their suffering. Well, that doesn't help them. It's like going to see somebody in the hospital. We would never go up to them and say, your cancer is really driving me crazy. I really need this to go into remission and go away. And I'm really getting impatient with this whole thing. It would be so offensive. But we feel, that's how we feel often around other people suffering. We feel bothered by it. Bothered by the continuing racism in our country, or bothered by this or that injustice in the world, but it can be just an ego trip, where it's like, I don't want to be bothered. So then we, blame somebody for the continuing injustices in the world, or we deny it, because we haven't learned how to, it almost feels an affront to suffering of the world, of those we care about, to have equanimity with suffering. But that's the only way we're going to get close to suffering, if we're not afraid of it. Our own suffering, the suffering of those around us. And this all has to do with what we call wise view. That's in a way, that's the definition of wise view, right? It's the understanding, the wisdom or the understanding that allows us to be intimate with all things, joys and sorrows, pleasantness, unpleasantness, and even neutrality. So what understanding allows our heart to remain even, as the Buddha says, even in a world that's uneven, or experience that's all over the place, described as the 8 vicissitudes, or the 8 worldly winds. Some of you have heard this teaching from the Buddha. Gain and loss. This is like what we're always cycling through. Gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and disrepute, pain and pleasure, right? It sounds familiar. And those of us with more privilege, those of us in more difficult circumstances, still, we're all cycling through more pleasantness and less pleasantness, more times when people appreciate and like us, times when people don't like us, don't want to be around us, and it just keeps moving. And so what is the understanding? And again, this is something, it's not like to figure this out. It's almost better to think about this in terms of trial and error, like as we move through the 8 worldly winds, like every day, what understanding gets me through the day without getting thrown around by all the ups and downs? What is that understanding? So it's not just getting through the day, but there's this recollectedness that's happening as we're getting through the day. So when we're feeling really reactive and thrown around by circumstance, we're correlating that with some way the mind is relating. Oh, when the mind is relating this way, then all the ups and downs are a cause for stress. And then other times, when we feel we have more immunity from stress, not because the circumstances are nice, normal day with the gain and loss, pleasure and pain, fame and disrepute, praise and blame, but all of a sudden just seemingly more immunity, more evenness, even amongst all of those good and bad things happening. Well, what is it? What is the understanding? What's the way the mind is understanding or relating that has protected the balance, allowed this balance, this evenness, this clarity, this intimacy to remain undisturbed? And then we, from our elders, people who've been doing this practice all the way back to the time of the Buddha himself, we have pointing out instructions like the Buddha has, and other teachers, they've done their best to articulate, put into words, the understanding. That when you have this understanding, then your heart will be protected. And this is where that simile of the raft, and the other simile that's related is the simile of the snake that the Buddha used. I'll share this in a moment. But it's like we can misuse the teachings like wanting them as something to cling to. But the teachings, the pointing out, like when the Buddha says, try, reflect on this way of relating, because we have to make it our own way of relating. It's not enough that the Buddha related this way and had some immunity from getting pushed around by experience. We have to relate this way. right? So when we get a teaching like, I put this sutta, the simile of the snake, sutta or discourse from the Buddha, it's one of the more famous ones, in the Google Doc. So people here in the room, you can get this Google Doc by going to the public calendar, Common Ground's public calendar, look for the 10:30 weekly practice group and the link for that Google Doc. And there are like 10 articles related to the series of talks there. And one of the most recent things I put in there is this sutta, the simile of the snake. And it's all about where somebody, one of the monks, has what's called a pernicious view, right? He thinks the Buddha is teaching one thing when the Buddha is not teaching that. And the way he misunderstood the Buddha, he thought the Buddha was saying, wrongly he thought this, that when you have some kind of problem, like you really want something, the way to resolve the problem is to get what you want, right? Like if you have a strong habit energy, you basically want to go with it because it hurts to not go with the strong habit energy. You really want to go to the fridge, and have that, whatever is in your fridge that you want to have. And if you just do what your habits tell you to do, there's no friction. It seems like, well, that's the easeful way, right? So the way it's described in the discourse, as I understand the Dhamma taught by the Buddha, those things called obstructions by the Buddha are not able to obstruct one who engages in them, right? So if I just do what I want to do, then life is easy. And his fellow monks, rolled their eyes probably and tried to say, hey, this is not what the Buddha teaches. And it said in the sutta, he still obstinately adhered to that pernicious view and continued to insist upon it. So eventually they talked to the Buddha, and the Buddha told them, tell that monk to come see me. And so the Buddha, he repeated what he had said to the other monks, this wrong view. And the Buddha said, misguided man, to whom have you ever known me to teach the teachings, the Dhamma, in that way? Have I not stated in many ways how obstructive things are obstructions and how they are able to obstruct one who engages in them, right? So what the Buddha is saying here, we have to trust our experience. But we have to have both the depth and the breadth to really understand. It's like just because something in the immediacy of the moment seems easier just to act out my habit energy, whatever it is, right? We're not seeing the depth of what's going on right now there in our heart, in our mind, and we're not seeing what's getting set in motion. And this is really about how the mind relates to sense experience and how the mind relates to its views, its understanding about sense experience. That is where the problem, the essence of the problem is. And so this is where the Buddha teachings, they can't fix our problem, but they can support us in becoming independent in addressing this squeeze, this burden in our heart. And it's right about how we understand sense experience, how we relate to sense experience. And the thing is, we relate to sense experience, the general view, which is so pervasive, we don't even think about it as a view. The habit is so pervasive, is sense experience. It's my way of being safe and feeling comfortable and being happy, is through basically feeding unpleasant sense experience and avoiding unpleasant sense experience. That's the way we humans pursue happiness. Make sense? I mean, when we look at our experience, we try to keep close the pleasant, keep far away the unpleasant. And it's an ongoing thing because life is a changing dynamic, And so we're always, even like within our own mind, it's like, oh, that's an unpleasant memory, you know, or that's a pleasant memory. Okay. So we're always in this tense relationship with sense experience. And sense experience in this general sense includes our thoughts about sense experience. So it's not just what we see and hear and touch and smell and taste, you know, through the sensitivities of our five senses, but it's also our thoughts about our sense experience too, right? It can be pleasant or unpleasant. True? I mean, if we remember the dog poop we saw on the sidewalk, for most of us, that's not a pleasant sense experience, right? Okay. And that thought, I don't have to see or smell the dog poop. I can just think about dog poop on the sidewalk, and that's unpleasant. Or you can think about, you know, when you go home, you get lunch, and that might be pleasant for some of you. So the Buddha's view that he asks us to check out, well, we hear the view, and then he says it's like a raft, and it's the same thing. It's like we don't want to use the simile of the snake I was going to share with you is, you know, when a person wants to get rid of a snake, you know, he taught in India where there were snakes, big snakes, more than here for sure, in Minnesota. And, you know, you don't grab the snake by the tail because it's going to swing around and bite you. And a lot of those snakes were poisonous. So there's a way to take a hold of a snake. You know, you pin it down with a forked stick, the neck, and then you grab the neck, right? And then you carry the snake where you need to carry it and let it go. And in the same way, he's using this simile, like there's a way to use these teachings. Because if you use them incorrectly, it's going to bite you. You're going to become a Buddhist, right? And then all of a sudden, like I mentioned earlier, you have to sort of, that's just another weightfulness to your brand, a Buddhist. Now I got to figure out, like, what is a Buddhist dressed like? I know they have kind of a calm vibe, right? So then you got to repress all your kind of dynamic side of your personality because I decided I was a Buddhist. So that's called grabbing the teachings by the tail. And then it ends up being a cause for suffering. But it's like, how do we hear the teachings? And the teaching, then the sutta that the Buddha is talking about, I'll read now. It's a long, I mean, not that long, 10 pages or so. But you can get it, and you might enjoy reading it, especially if you haven't read too many. And, you know, when you read these discourses of the Buddha, remember they've been written in a way that was an oral tradition for about 500 years, and then written in a way that supported memorization, because during those early centuries when it was just an oral tradition, they were recorded, the teachings were recorded in a very repetitious way that made it easier to catch mistakes, because the teachings get repeated in each discourse, within each discourse. Anyway, this last section, or close to the last section, he goes, therefore, practitioners, whatever is not yours, abandon it. When you have abandoned it, that will lead to your welfare and happiness for a long time. So the word abandon it, he's really talking about abandoning the identification or abandoning the attachment to things. That's the problem. It's the wrong understanding that's the problem. Not the teaching itself, but the wrong understanding, like, this is something I have. This is a powerful teaching that I have. Somebody donated to the center, our retreat center in Wisconsin. I was just on retreat for 4 days with a group of community members. And I did some work during the work period. And someone had donated a nice set of Milwaukee tools. Some of you who have tools know Milwaukee's a pretty good, high-quality brand of power tools that carpenters and other people have. And and I was just, noticing, like, how effective, lightweight, powerful. These are all cordless tools now because the batteries are so small, and yeah, it's just amazing compared to taking a screwdriver and unscrewing something, with these tools. And but you can imagine somebody getting a great set of tools and like wanting to put them on the mantle above the fireplace, like beautiful, powerful tools. And every time someone would come by, it's like, let me show you my tools. And never do what the tools were designed to do. And that's the same thing with these teachings. So when you hear these teachings, like, how are you, when you go home today, how are you going to look at this, whatever is not yours, abandon it. When you've abandoned it, that will lead to your welfare and happiness for a long time. And what is it that's not yours? Bodily experience, right? Just the tactile experience that you're feeling all the time, it's not yours. So feeling the air touching our skin right now, or feeling the ache in our knee, or whatever we're feeling, that sensation being known, right? That's what that is. It's something being known. And it's extra to say to ourselves, that pain is happening to me, or that pleasurable sensation is happening to me. That's a thought being known. But the sensation is just the sensation being known. And if we have a reaction to the sensation, that's just a thought being known. If there's some feeling tone, energetic feeling tone, pleasant, unpleasant, that's just that energetic feeling tone being known. So we're going to abandon making something more than what it is. Every single sense experience we've ever had, the most sublime or beautiful, pleasant sense experience, thought about sense experience we've had, or the most horrendous, painful sense experience we've had, is really just that. It's just that appearance of something being known. And it's shocking when we realize that. But this is what we have to take the teaching and then use. Any moment will do. You don't need a special moment like this moment, even listening to the talk. Oh, this is just this experience being known. And if you're excited or if you're moved, that's just that experience being known. If you're bored or rejecting, somehow think it's wrong, whatever that is, that's an experience being known. So let me just finish this before we wrap up today. When you've abandoned it, that will lead to your welfare and happiness for a long time. That's what we check out. Like, is that actually true for me in my lived experience? And then he goes on. So the first is material form, tactile experience, you could say. Feeling tone is not yours. Abandon it. When you've abandoned it, that will lead to your welfare and happiness for a long time. Perception is not yours. Abandon it. When you've abandoned it, right, you were abandoning the wrong identification. You're not trying to get rid of perception. Can you do that? No. Perception is just like what happens, as long as we have this life, that part of the mind that perceives is going to be perceiving. That's just what that part of the mind does. It in a sense, names sense experience. Oh, that's a person. Right? That's a perception, or that's a wall. That's called perception, where the mind names or recognizes experience. Same with the feeling tone. Like when we see something that's unpleasant, we're not doing that unpleasantness. That just happens based on our conditioning or pleasantness, right? Same with, as long as our eyes are working, they're going to be visual experience or auditory experience or smell, taste, touch experience. It just comes with the territory of having a mind and body that's working well enough. But he's saying, abandon the identification to all of the five senses, abandon to feeling tone, to perception, and all the mental formations, all the thoughts, reactions we have to sense experience. That's just those reactions, those thoughts that arise. Like when we see somebody, all of our previous moments of relating to that person, they kind of come online, don't they? Right? And that's what the Buddha means by mental formations. It's kind of a catch-all term in terms of our mental activity, how the mind, whenever we have a sense experience, how the past experiences that are in any way related to this current sense experience informs the current sense experience. And that category is called mental formations. And then consciousness itself, the capacity to know, that can be recognized too as just something like, oh, there's consciousness. How do I know there's consciousness? Because stuff is being known, right? And so that can be recognized in a sense indirectly because things are being known. But we don't have to take consciousness personally. It's our habit to take consciousness personally. But are you doing it, or is there no, it's just part of what this experience is, what we call being human. These things, and the Buddha's saying, abandon it. And then there's one more. What do you think? Yeah, this is the simile the Buddha uses here, and we'll end with this. Practitioners, what do you think? If people carried off grass, sticks, branches, and leaves in this Jeta Grove, right? This is somebody back at the time of the Buddha donated this place for the monks and nuns to practice, a beautiful garden. If somebody carried away all the twigs, grass, so on, from Jeta's grove, or burned them, or did what they liked with them, would you think people are carrying us off, or burning us, or doing what they like with us? No, sir. And why not? Because that is neither ourself nor what belongs to ourself, right? Because, Jeta Grove, it didn't belong to the monks and nuns. They were just allowed to use this garden. It was set aside for them, right? So the twigs and the leaves and whatever, that's not them. So the Buddha, you can see where he's going with this. Well, can we relate to what we tend to take personally in the same way? Just in the way we've also learned, like going back to the simile of those of you who have had kids. When they're young, they're very much your kid. When they're 26 or 27, sort of your kid, sort of still yours, and sort of not yours. Like, I don't know who you are, You kind of look like me when I was younger, but, you are not me. And then later, maybe, I don't know, it's just like, you've just become your own self, your own person. And I love you, but you're not really me in any kind of way. And so we have to, the Buddha actually uses like that, whatever it is, 50-year experience, if you live long enough to see your child become 50, like that could happen in a moment with any experience, from that strong identification, this is I, me, or mine, to this is something being known, something to appreciate it as its own arising, but not me, not mine, not who I am. And you can use that simile as like a parent relating to their 50-year-old who's independent, making their own choices, finding their way, expressing their own personality, right? Their own lived experience, which is not the same as the parent. And by that time, as a 65-year-old, I see some of the relatedness to my parents, but, I am not my parents. Like, anybody have a doubt about that? Sometimes we're a little stunned when we look in the mirror on that kind of gross level, like, our nose may be the same as one of our parents or something, our hairline or something like that. But in a more felt, integrated sense, it's very clear that no, we're not. And we can have that same relationship with thought, sight, sound, touch, all of our experience. It is what it is. It's just a very strong habit to be identified. So if you stay for the optional small groups, whether you're online, Lucy's here today, or here in the building, you want to stay, we have small groups for 15 minutes. I'll just review how they work in case you might be interested in staying. So usually 3 or 4 people, sometimes a little bit more. You just introduce yourself. You can share your pronouns if you want. And then each person gets 2 minutes or so, up to 3 minutes at the most, just to talk about something related to the theme that I've spoke about or your practice. So in today's context, it might be just sharing places in your life where you went from attachment identification to having a lot more space of non-attachment, non-identification. And especially places where that can happen pretty quickly. I mean, it's okay to talk about how it happened over a long period of time, but also little bubbles where you were really attached, and then the bubble burst, and there was non-attachment. Like you were really caught up in some self-drama, taking something really personally, and then something in your understanding shifted, and a lot of that identification just dropped away. So those little or big testimonials can be very interesting to share. Of course, anything that's relevant is okay to share. And then after everyone in the small group shares, then there's usually 5 minutes or so for just open discussion. So we always have these after the Sunday morning, just a chance to get to know different community members. We try to organize them in a random way. Lucy will just divide those of you online up in random groups, but you don't have to stay. And maybe I'll just make one announcement. I'll be leading a day-long retreat on the 29th. Everyone's welcome both online and in person here. And a number of other things happening, including our annual 9-day residential retreat and also online retreat. And we're wondering if people want to practice in the building here at the City Center. So you can register for that if you're free. The 9 days ending on Labor Day. We do this every year. It's the longest residential retreat that Shelley Graff and I, the 2 guiding teachers, teach at the center. It will be assisted by Stacy McClendon and Gabe Keller-Flores, 2 of our Dharma teachers here at the center. Yeah, thanks for coming, everyone. Really nice to see all of you here today. Please stay around if you want to be part of the small groups. Otherwise, hope to see you down the road.